Welcome to a new episode of Outside the Panels with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to an episode of Outside the Panels. I'm your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes, and as people know, I am not a big, huge fan of horror. What I am a big fan of is, of course, pretty girls and monster books of a certain type. Therefore, with those two things in mind, let me introduce you to tonight's guest, creator of Orgy of the Blood Freaks and much more to talk about. It is Mr. Phil Mucci like Gucci. Hey!
Hey, Johnny.
Hey, man, how's it going?
Good, man. Thanks for
Good,
having
man.
me.
You are, yeah, you're more than welcome. More than welcome. So, we talked backstage before we got going, and it is a fact I'm not a huge horror fan. That said, Orgy of the Blood Freaks, man, and Gringo Loco, it's flipbook technology driven friend. Where did this come from?
Well, it's a funny story because
Okay.
the character of Professor Dario Bava, who's the star of Orgy of the Blood Freaks, was a character that I wrote into a music video that I directed for a band called Huntress. And while we were shooting that video, which is a low budget production, it was very much like a 70s B movie shoot. But while we were shooting it and resetting for some practical blood effects with vampire babes and all this nonsense, the DP looked at me and he was like, you know, man, you can't just kill this character off in this video because he's too good. An Italian vampire slayer? It's hilarious. So we actually decided then and there, kind of like, we got to continue this character in some way or another. So I started writing stories about him and expanding that universe. And the result is what you see in these books. We actually did one graphic novel first, which was kind of testing the waters to see if people would like enjoy the character and enjoy the world of the character, because the world of Professor Dario Bava is a world in which all the B movies and Italian sort of exploitation films simultaneously coexist. There are black love killers from Giallo. There are vampire lesbians. There are werewolves. There are monsters. And there is kind of the church as this overarching kind of like power, the man, we call it, in the stories. So we did the first graphic novel, which included some like backstories of the main characters. It was called Murder Vibes from the Monster Dimension. And that did really well. And at that point, we decided COVID had hit right when that book came out. And it was our first book. And we literally got the boxes of books, a pallet of 1,000 books on my doorstep at the end of February 2020. By 2 weeks later, everything was shut down. There were no conventions. There was no in-store signings. There was nothing. So we decided, well, let's keep this going. There's nothing else, they're going to keep us from doing this. We can just tap into this audience. If they like it, we'll do another thing. And we immediately turned around and did a coloring book, which we called Professor Dario Bava's Occult Activity Book and Spirit Board, in parentheses. And it's a very fun interactive coloring book that we're already in the second printing of. It did very, very well. Wow. At that point, we were like, okay, it's kind of taking off. Let's develop the long story that I wrote, which was Orgy of the Blood Freaks, which was meant to be like kind of a multi-part either series or limited series in comics. I had originally written it as short films that we would kind of link together or something. But once I did the first graphic novel, I was like, God, this is such a great way to tell stories. I'd never done it myself. I loved comics, but I'd never done it myself. But the way kind of the world of filmmaking and media in general, where it's all sort of blending together now, that became like an inspiration to me. I was like, my last short film I spent too much money on, and this we could do for a lot less. It'll take longer, but we'll have all the art, we'll have all the writing, we'll have the stories in place, and we just kind of got hooked on it. So we decided to launch Orgy of the Blood Freaks, and at the time I was also like, hey, it's COVID, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Let's introduce a story, and let's do it like the things that inspired me, which was like sneaking into drive-ins when I was young. And I literally had to sneak through a graveyard down train tracks to get into the busted fence at the drive-in to see when I was a kid. And that always stuck with me as this great, kind of memory. And I love those kind of movies where they hook you with their crazy ideas, and it's just fun, pure genre fun. So I was like, why don't we do a book where we can actually, like, we've got one story on one side and you have to flip it over and get another book on the other side. And that's how we'll introduce Gringo Loco. I thought it was a silly idea. I also thought I thought of it because I'm a narcissist, I guess, or something. But it turns out like that was actually a really good idea, because once the cons started happening again, and once we could do live events and signings, the flip book thing turns people on. They just love it because it's just a funny idea, and it's fun. And if you explain, it's like one is kind of like an Italian horror gothic sexy Euro thing, and the other side is kind of a spaghetti Western thing, both sort of Italian in origin. The people
one
who
vampires,
know,
one zombies.
Right, exactly. The people who know are like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. So we sold out of that first book, and we're doing a Kickstarter now for the second book and a second print run of that book one.
Excellent. So you've kind of queued me up perfectly there. Let's have a look at the trailer for your Kickstarter. I've got it ready to go, give or take, with the powers of technology. Let's see. Add it there. Is it there yet? Yep. All right, here we go. We'll get to the monies in a moment. Here is the trailer for issue 2 of Orgy of the Blood Freaks. Check it out.
Orgy of the Blood Freaks.
Hey everybody, I'm Phil Mucci of Diabolic, creator, writer, and colorist of Professor Dario Bava, Orgy of the Blood Freaks, and supernatural spaghetti western, Gringo Loco. With the help of my Diabolic cohorts, Ian Mackey and Dan Simpson, we've been fortunate enough to work with some incredible artists and living legends to bring these stories to life. I grew up on monster movies and drive-in double features, and I wanted to bring that experience to the world of comics in a fun and engaging way. Toiling in our secret lab, we conjured flipbook technology. The first book in our double feature trilogy sold out in less than a year, and the second book is almost finished. At 88 pages, it's even bigger and wilder and crazier. That's where you come in. We need your support to print the second run of book 1 and the first run of book 2. We can't do it without you. So check out the rewards, add-ons, and what I think are pretty uniquely awesome stretch goals, and pitch in whatever you can so we can keep on making weird books for wonderful people like you. Thanks, everybody.
Professor Dario Bava, Paranormal Playboy.
There you go.
Oh,
if that turns you on, this book is for you.
Well, I had to say, I'm not going to lie, the thigh-high stocking almost got me. I was like, woo! Yeah. Making fishnets next time, and I'm there. So, right. So, the video, man. Is video's your kind of coup de grace? Is that kind of where you came from creatively?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of my history as creative and as an artist, it has been the writing and the visuals, both, but in different mediums. For a while, I was a commercial photographer in New York City. I did a lot of like music photography, fashion photography, and photography. You know, in my heart, I wanted to tell more. I wanted to tell stories, you know, and it was just like at the time that was how I was making my money. And when I finally kind of had enough, I started telling my own stories and doing stuff. And mostly in film, I did short films that got me to music videos, that got me to comics, kind of. And writing screenplays and things like that, and working on other people's screenplays as a writer, conceptually fixing things up and adding my kind of genre spin to things. But visually, yeah, I mean, my love of comics I had like subscriptions to Heavy Metal magazine when I was too young to really kind of have them, and I love that stuff. And I reference a lot of those short form comic stories in my own design work as a director and as an animator, especially because a lot of my videos, like that teaser where you see the animation stuff, that's stuff that I animated. I actually shot actors on green screen, all in costume, and then worked on them in post-production to create that animated sort of Ralph Bakshi inspired, you know, rotoscope animation, you know.
Bit of Scooby-Doo in the background, maybe.
What's that?
Bit of Scooby-Doo in the background with the haunted house and the bats coming out of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and using photography and using everything that I've kind of learned, because I kind of came up during the whole like digital revolution with photography and with video. So a lot of the things that I've worked on and learned professionally, I could apply to this work. And even with comics, I mean, I'm still using a lot of that stuff. Especially with different artists that I work with require different sorts of references or design work. And I forget the guy's name, but you were talking to a guy recently who mentioned using 3D CGI
this
models.
is Richard Fairgray, the ex-wife of Frankenstein.
Maybe, yeah. And there's a storyboarding program that I use that's very rudimentary 3D, but it allows you to build a set, and that helps. That helps with like an artist like Professor Dario Bava, especially the Orgy of the Blood Freak story. It has a lot of locations. It's kind of a globe-trotting kind of world, you know, where we're going from one place to another place. And in book 2, we stay in the main location for most of the book. And it became a thing of like, how do we create something that the artist can reference so it'll stay consistent, you know, throughout, you know, the story. So that's all stuff that I learned doing other mediums, but in the current world we're living in, you know, all these mediums are blending together so much that you can use those same skill sets, you know, to help tell the story. So that's kind of like it feels to me sometimes like I'm the jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. But I think I'm a master of some.
I remember it's a guy, Winston Gumrow. His friend did a 3D model of the house, the haunted house, so you can keep.
Oh, Winston, that's the name. Yeah.
Richard, he did ex-wives of Frankenstein. He does like photographic sort of like models of the cover, like of a bandaged face and stuff. So,
Oh yeah,
but,
I do
yeah.
that too. I use Photoshop to like make mock-ups. Loco started with a Charles Bronson illustration from Once Upon a Time in the West. And then I started putting stitches on it and we're making it weird. And then I gave it to Vicente Alcazar, who's a legend. And he then spun it off into his own looks. And it's really great that we have these tools now. We don't use AI at all because fuck AI. Oh, sorry. I did it already.
You know what? I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. AI is I can't even spell AI. That's how bad I don't like it.
It's theft. I mean, I look at it as theft. I mean, if human beings hadn't been creating art all this time up to the point of AI would have nothing to work with. It's just stealing everything we've already done. And that's not cool. I mean, because already art is like the worst place to make money in the world. You know, like only a couple people really do make money at it. So that upsets me. People ask, you actually have to sign a waiver when you start a Kickstarter campaign for a comic book to say, no, we're not using AI, you know,
really,
which is interesting. I'm glad that they're doing that now. Yeah,
definitely. If you think making money doing art's bad, you should try doing podcasts. I'll just throw that out there. Well,
at least we're doing it for the love, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're doing it for the love. And to be fair, what's not to love? Because I mean, your guys were kind enough to send me issue 1 across, so we'll have a look at a couple of pages of issue 1, so everyone can get a teaser. That's right. A tease of what to expect. You know, there we go. Classic horror kind of style, sexy vampire babes, and there's Dario in the background getting all Thor and Buffy all at the same time.
Taglietti.
Yeah, what a great cover that is. It just screams that Hammer House of Horror to me.
Yeah, I mean, Taglietti is a legend. He's retired, semi-retired, but we've gotten him to work on 2 covers for us, and he's actually just agreed to do the cover for book 3. So that's awesome. His work is incredible. He did a bunch of 70s Italian comic book covers, 80s Italian comic book covers. He used to be a set designer for Fellini. Yes, that Fellini. And then he spun off into doing sexy comic book covers and paintings, and they're gorgeous and they're hand painted and there's no AI. And
let me ask you a quick question then, because I mean, there's no escaping the sex appeal in this, right? Vampire babes are hot, no matter which way you cut it, whether they're going after the hero or whether they're going after the heroine, whichever way it works, vampire babes are hot. What is it then about European art that allows that that sense of sexuality in their art, in the pictures, as we can see here, as opposed to something a little bit more Western that seems to shy away from that at times, apart from Zenoscope, which we're not counting.
I mean, I think in the UK, you guys nailed some of the awesome sexuality of the Hammer horror films in the early 70s when they were shifting, you know, when they were deciding like, okay, we got to get the younger audience. What do? We do Dracula AD 1972 with Carolyn Monroe. And I got a lot of inspiration from that as a kid. I mean, I watched those movies on TV, you know, on mornings, your double feature and stuff like that. So the Europeans, yes, but the British too, I would say. And as far as America goes, we're just more of an uptight Puritan kind of origin of our country. It's really weird. You can show so much violence, which is acceptable on internet ads and social media and anything. But if you show boobs, which all of us have, by the way, you get shut down. It's ridiculous. It's this old Puritan archetype that I don't understand it because I've never felt that way. But I think that's why the Europeans have more of a, you know, robust kind. They never took that stance. You know, it's like we have siestas so we can get laid in the middle of the day. We it's just much more of a it's not considered something prurient. I mean, they have nudity on TV in Europe on regular TV.
You've hit kind of one of my key points, because I tell my day job that everyone knows I collect comic books and I do this pod, and there's old comic books, you know, it's always women in scantily clad clothes like Wonder Woman and all this sort of stuff, and I'm like, how many people watch a Nicki Minaj video on MTV or a Beyonce or any other plethora of attractive women that are semi-naked practically every time you see them, and yet nobody bats an eyelid? You put Wonder Woman in a thigh-high dress and everyone loses their mind. It's like, you're like, what? Well, what happened there?
Exactly.
You know, I just don't get it. I don't get it at all.
I think it's built into us as human beings. I mean, I don't bat an eye at sexuality. I don't care if it doesn't match with my own or if it's your own thing. I mean, it's fine. It's all about, you know, love and appreciation of beauty or, you know, ideas, or I don't even, it makes me feel weird sometimes, because when you do a general Comic-Con versus like a horror Comic-Con, there are a lot more kids and there are a lot more people who are into you know, the superheroes and that world of comics, which is fine. It's not, it was never really my world, to be honest. I mean, when I was way younger, I was more into like the Marvel Dracula and werewolf stuff, you know, Werewolf by Night and stuff like that. I even had it on Viewmaster, you know, where you could see it in 3D.
Yeah. I remember those bad boys.
And so you see people react kind of to the artwork up front in one of two ways. One is they try to steer their kids away from it. The other is they wait till their kids are gone and then they come over and talk to you. Like, this looks awesome. What is this? And the funny thing is too, as the kids are being dragged away, we see they're just looking up at our banners like,
I've told this story recently. I'll tell it again prior to we taking a break, and we'll come back to talk about the book. When I must have been about 9 or 10, and I had some pocket money or birthday money left over. I got to the local newsagents with my mom, and my mom said, "Oh, you can buy a comic book." And I was like, "Oh, excellent, cool." So we used to get DC comics in the UK back in the 70s. So I'm flicking through the DC comics, and there, just above there, someone must have put in the wrong place a Marvel black and white Sheena of the Jungle. All right. So there's this black and white book of a girl jungle bikini. Yes, I count my pennies. Yes, £1.50. That's £1.50. I'd like this one, please. And my mom's like, yeah, okay, fine. Didn't even blink an eye. Didn't even look to see what it was. I got away with robbery that day. Robbery, I tell you. But yes, couldn't believe I got away with that. Could not believe. But yeah, I suppose, you know, that liberal attitude and all that. Cool. Before we get into the book some more, we've got issue 1 to look at. Talk about some of the characters. Talk about some of the origins of the characters. I know our hero has an interesting mix of influences in there. We'll get to that and then we'll have a look at the Kickstarter. But before we do that, time for an advert for one of our other shows. We talk about horror, so seems fitting. Check this out.
Do you want to find out what makes the professor do his happy dance? Check out the Old Timers Comic Book Show, only on UCPN.
Now, the horror isn't the professor doing his dance. Check out the Old Timers Comic Book Show, because Phil's mentioned books like Dracula, Tomb of Dracula, Werewolf by Night, and all that sort of stuff. In the recent Old Timers, they have had a look at the black and white books of the 70s, which include some of those black and white horrors that potentially influenced Phil and this book in places as well. So there is a link there. I am being too clever for my own good. There you go. Check it out. Right, where were we? Yes. There we go. Your character here, he's got some chops going on there. He's wearing a fur waistcoat. He's got his chest hair going on. He's got his
That vest is from the Satanic Rites of Dracula, actually.
Oh, is it? Oh. That's me told. All right, how did this character come about? You mentioned he was brought into the video, but now as you expanded on him, influences?
The influences were pretty broad, but when it boils down to the actual character himself, I grew up in a my father's family were Italian immigrants in the U.S., and he married an Irish woman who was very sort of into the feminist movement at the time. So I saw a lot of conflicts between sort of the Italian patriarchy ideas and kind of the modern ideas that were evolving at the time. So a lot of Baba's intensity and his ideas come from a man who was raised in the church deciding to leave the church and accept this new wave of feminism and civil rights and really trying to open his mind. And he comes off as being kind of a cocky know-it-all who actually gets people in a lot of trouble and gets people hurt because he's sort of an overcompensating character. He's kind of fun. And one of the best compliments we got was at a convention where a guy bought the first book in this series the night before, came back the next day, and he's like, I loved it. Professor Dario Bava is such a, I won't say, but jerk. But he's so funny. He's like, is there more already? And we sold him like the original graphic novel, which kind of has origin stories in it of him. And that's always great to me to hear because he is kind of an anti-hero in a lot of ways because he's not fully formed. He's kind of going through these things with an unearned sense of confidence. And as you learn in book 1, that ends up getting a lot of his assistants killed.
Oh no.
Which is very funny, which makes us concerned for his new potential assistant, the lovely and sassy Sister Sadie. Who you can see there in the middle of that. Yeah.
Cool. This I was flicking through the book and I'm like, yeah, I get it. Horror, monsters, graveyard, kids in orphanage, get it, scary. And I turned to this page, I was like, when did James Bond come into this? This is like one of those, in a minute now I'm going to hear like Shirley Bassey singing Goldfinger at me or something.
Yeah, that's part of the influences for me. Yeah, I think it's because when I was a kid in cable TV, they used to play all these old 60s James Bond movies and horror movies and early 70s stuff. And I just fell in love with a lot of those aesthetics and also the attitudes where it's like, this is a cultural revolution, man. You just don't get it, you square. I loved all that stuff, stick it to the man. And as I got older, when I watched some of those movies, I was like, they don't really live up to that a lot of the time. And it's still kind of sexist and it's still kind of, and this is kind of my way of reinterpreting the stuff that I like, all the tropes that I loved that formed my kind of creative imagination and like putting my own spin on it, to make it, to say things that I think the genre stuff can say when it's not obsessed with like jump scares or just creating a mood or tension. Like the fantasy element of horror has, I think, a lot of potential. And this is kind of like how I'm working out some of those ideas that I have and how to express them, like create a world that people can get engaged with and characters they care about. But it's not about those typical checklists in horror. Like we need the gore scene, we need this jump scare, we need, because there's a lot of great stuff in the fantasy of horror. And Gringo Loco also is about that as well. It's like taking those spaghetti westerns where it's the mysterious stranger, we don't know anything about him, and turning that around a little bit and being like, well, it's, you know, a lot of it is going to be explained by these visuals, and a lot of it is going to come to you in pieces as the story progresses, you know. Because I love that. I love because comics have that ability too to like surprise you and keep
Absolutely.
like twisting things around, you know.
Yeah.
That, you know, you've seen enough movies, it becomes sort of rote and you're expecting the thing to happen. When you hear the soundtrack cue and you're like, okay, here it comes.
You're talking my language. You're talking my language. I'm not a huge horror fan. For one, I don't like getting scared that much. Two, I haven't been scared in a long time, because you're absolutely right. When you watch a movie, the dialogue, the music changes, the soundtrack changes. You see a door creak and close, and you're like, oh man, there's gonna be someone behind it. Then the dog starts barking. You're like, what? What's the dog barking at? So you
all the cues,
and then the door's closed. Is someone there? Oh, no. And I'm like, you know what? I'm done. And I think that kind of jump scare is really hard to do in comic books, because there's no other than the visual element. There's nothing.
You get the turn page.
I know, but that's not the same, though, is it?
No.
Because you go to the comic book store, you pick up a comic, you flick through it, say, oh yeah, cool, and that's kind of it. I'll buy this book, please. It looks great. So it still doesn't have that same impact. So I think that kind of jump scare horror is hard to do. Gore horror, not so much, because the current techniques. So I definitely think you have to hit the clever horror or the fantasy horror to get any sort of longevity in the genre. And you guys have obviously nailed that. How much have you nailed that? Well, I'm glad you asked me that question. Here is your Kickstarter. Let me put it into dollars for you, because I'm in the UK. Let's see. You have got $9,306 pledged of a $7,500 goal, with 3 weeks to go at the time of recording.
Yeah,
that's pretty impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's thanks to the people that have supported us all along. You know, we don't have a huge mailing list, but we have a mailing list of like people who really love the stuff and are excited about it. And they all came out kind of early to help pledge to the campaign. And that makes a big difference for the algorithms and all the, you know, mysterious digital stuff that happens with the campaigns. But yeah, and we got like sort of a drunk dial last night from one of our big backers who's like, I realized I'm missing some stuff. I want to get it all. How do I add it? How do I add it all? I want it all. This is a new backer. And we're like, don't worry, dude. We'll set it up. We'll hook you up. You know, we'll make it happen for you. Because it's also like, since we did all these campaigns during kind of COVID, the recent ones, it was it's interesting to see how the world is reshaping after that event. And you know, with the UK, you know, the Brexit stuff, and with shipping and postal fees changing, it's been a really weird time. So adding like lots of digital options was something we were very like, we want to make sure people can read it. We don't care how they read it. You know, like it doesn't matter. Like the digital, we don't really, it doesn't really pay that much to do it, but it gets the stuff out there without people having to pay an arm and a leg for shipping, you know. And like however we can get people to enjoy the stories, because when it hits with the right people, they really, really love it. And that's very exciting. You know, we just did Long Beach Comic-Con this past weekend, and it was kind of a general Comic-Con, and it's one that's kind of seems like it's dying out. But we still had the people who came in one day, bought the book, and then came back the next day to buy more books. And that's the best feeling in the world, because you're hoping to connect with people, you know. Perfect. That's why you spend so much time on these books and stories. And that's why we make them kind of, they're oversized, they're graphic novels, they're you know, they feel good in your hand. You can pick it up and be like, oh, this is a cool thing, you know. And we do it full color. I am inspired a lot by like Warren comics and eerie and creepy and Vampirella in the 70s, which to the listeners is like, those had full color, gorgeous covers,
Did it?
painted covers, but inside it was all black and white. All black and white newsprint, but amazing inked artwork. And one of our artists, Vicente Alcazar, he did all those books. He does Loco for us. He's semi-retired in his late 70s, and the guy is a machine. I can't
wait.
how incredible he works.
I'm a machine.
He's the machine too.
Don't be giving away my nickname. That's harsh. Right. So I agree with you. I think with the world as it is now, as much as I am not a big fan of PDFs, I prefer comics in my hand. Again, I think PDFs must be a way to go for international backers, because obviously people can pay the $10 for the book and don't want to pay $30 on shipping on that, which is, I understand.
Exactly. I mean, in Australia, places that are really far away from us, we've had some nervous moments in other campaigns, because people will still buy from far away places. They don't care about the shipping, but it's nerve-wracking when it takes over a month for it to get there, and you're like, oh God, what's happening with the books, and they'll buy prints too, because we've offered some limited edition prints that were signed by Emanuele Taglietti in Italy, and those were so expensive for us to do, because we had to make the prints, send them to him, have him sign them, have them sent back to us, and then send them out again. It's we're working with a legend who's a lot of his original paintings were perished in a fire in Venice. So we're we're really we feel like we're offering something of value to people who want to collect his work. So yeah, that's a roundabout way of saying, like, we try to accommodate as many people as we can. If you want a digital, if you want to read the stuff but you don't want to spend the money on shipping, we got you. If you want to invest in some collectible artwork, we got you too. We're just trying to make it as appealing to everyone as we can, because we know that we're working in a niche. We actually asked us at Long Beach Comic-Con this past weekend, what's a spaghetti western?
Really?
It was the first time we've ever heard that question.
Oh my God.
I was like, the good, the bad, the ugly? I've heard of it.
I bet there were like 12, no, it'll be about 16, 17 maybe.
Early 20s. It was like
no
25-year-old,
28-year-old.
Yeah, it was crazy. It's to be expected. I'm an old man now.
Look at my gray hair, really. So you can check out the Kickstarter to get involved. You have a website. We'll show that in a moment, where it goes direct. You click any of these links, it'll take you to Kickstarter. So
exactly. ProfessorDarioBava.com takes you everywhere.
There it is at the bottom of the screen. Ta-da! How hard is that? Dead easy. If you want to go Kickstarter, you're an idiot because it's harder. I'm joking. You know how it works. Kickstarter, go to the main Kickstarter page, type in Professor Dario, it'll come up. Phil reckons that if you type the word orgy, it'll come up, but hey, don't hold me to that. Whatever you see on that page with that word has nothing to do with me. All right? Just look at it like that, just to check to see. Yeah. Don't be writing in complaining about it. Thank you very much. And of course, it's social media. You've got Instagram at Diabolic LLC, and Facebook, they're Diabolic Films. Dead easy to follow. I feel a little bit, you know what? I feel a little bit we've had done to by one of your things. Not personally, but I think we've talked about the girls a lot. We haven't talked about Gringo, so let's have some Gringo on, I think, before we call it a day, because I think fair is fair. The age of equality and all that, right? We might look at. We can't just have pretty girls. We're going to have ugly fellas as well. And there we go.
Yeah,
it's like a Frankenstein's monster. What is it about the classic monsters like vampires and werewolves and zombies and Frankenstein? What is it that still drags people in to check them out?
Well, for me, Gringo Loco is like a long gestating idea.
I love his tash.
Huh?
I love his mustache.
Yeah, that's very Charles Bronson, that mustache, and Vicente kept that in there, and I loved it. I was like, good, cool. The whole idea of Gringo Loco has changed over the years, but it was like because of my love of the Frankenstein story and of the actual Frankenstein book, Mary Shelley's book, which is totally different from how the movies kind of explain the character. Like he actually is a very much, he's very human, and he's having an existential crisis. That's the book, of Frankenstein, and it deals with, like, what is the responsibility of science to this human that it's created, who speaks multiple languages in the book and reads Byron, and he's an intelligent creature who looks like a monster, and that is something that I always felt kind of like I think every human being kind of feels that way sometimes in different situations, where the way we look or the way we come off is not who we are inside, and yet we're treated based on that look. And the idea behind Gringo Loco was to take something like that. And I also love the 80s version of Frankenstein, which I consider Robocop to be like a political satire.
I say that all the time. I say that all the time. That bit in the parking lot where he was trying to get away from OCP, and all the cops are there lining up, shooting him down, and he falls off. And
it's like the villagers with the torches lighting him on fire.
Exactly. Robocop is Frankenstein. Absolutely.
It's Frankenstein. Yeah. No, I always loved it, and I was like, well, what's my version going to be? Because as a storyteller, there's those theories that there's only so many stories or whatever. And when you're younger as a writer creator, I think you become obsessed with certain like complete originality, and then you realize at a certain point that's actually totally impossible, because you are so influenced and so full of all these stories you've heard your whole life that it's obviously going to be reflected. And we're all human beings, and we're all thinking up the same stuff, and we're all going through those feelings. So it's all of it's similar, at least. So once you let go of that, it became like, well, what is my Frankenstein? What is my existential crisis story? What does it mean to be human story in the world of horror and monsters? And Gringo Loco took many forms in the last 10 years, because I've been thinking about it for over 10 years. And I finally just decided, once we did the first Professor Dario Bava book, I'm like, because I wanted to do it as a Western, but I was like, Western movies don't really sell, and we can't, it'd be hard to do. I'm like, but if I do it as a graphic novel, I can do whatever the hell I want, I can make it exactly the way I imagined it the first time. So I was kind of influenced by politics at the time, and I came up with a backstory for Gringo Loco that I wrote out really fast, gave it to my partners at Diabolic, and they're like, oh, this is great. This is, we love this. We should do this. We definitely want to do this. And then I thought about it for a while, and like a week later, I'm like, okay, I'm working on a script, but we're going to ignore the entire backstory of Gringo Loco. We're going to do it like a spaghetti Western. We're not going to know anything about that backstory. We're just going to drop people into the middle of the action months after that, all that stuff happened. And then I began writing it as an existential kind of story. Like, we're just going to stay with Gringo Loco and find out little pieces about this guy as he goes through the world, unable to kind of articulate what or who he is. Some people may recognize him from his past life, but we can't really, we're not going to really get into it. It's going to be more about what his experience is as this sort of undead, undying, stitched together man. And the one thing I will tease people about for book 2 is that a new theory emerges. A new thing is stated by one of the many villains in this world, because it's a brutal spaghetti Western world where everybody's correct, everybody's terrible. It's like America now.
You said that, not me. All right.
And we learn like that perhaps he was put together from the pieces of the men he's already killed. Perhaps that's an explanation for why he appears the way he does. So I'll leave you with that.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate that. Right. Last question before we do the wrap up. One hand you've got Professor Dario, on the other you've got Gringo. This is like sending one of your kids to college. Which one's your favorite?
Oh my God. Oh, I have to say I love them both, but I will say like the world I want to live in is Professor Dario Bava's world.
All right.
The world that I'm most afraid of is Gringo Loco's world, but Gringo Loco is more personal to me in that way. Is like I see a lot of myself in Gringo Loco, and I see a lot of like I can identify with that character because that's way more of a very deep character study on that.
Cool.
But
Excellent.
I'll put it that way.
Good answer. Good answer. So for Diabolic on social media, we've seen this already. Check out the Instagram; it's there, and the Facebook. No X or Twitter on that one. That's fine. Head over to Kickstarter. It's there. Just put it there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you found us, you found Kickstarter. It's simple as.
Just type in orgy when you get the Kickstarter. You'll find it. I said it that time, so you didn't have to.
No comments. Alternatively, you can head over to Professor Dario Bava, however your accent tells it, .com, and there's links directly there as well. So there you go. Get involved with the project. You've seen some of the art. It looks great. The ideas are fantastic. And hey, who doesn't like sexy vampire babes? It's simple. You know?
I ask.
Yeah, who doesn't? You know? That's it. Simple as. Phil, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for spending the time. I know you must be really busy. The Kickstarter's in full swing, so hopefully we haven't taken too much of your time, and then you can crack on. Oh no,
this is great. Review. I really enjoyed it.
Cool, excellent. Don't forget to check out the UCPM for all your favorite shows. You saw the trailer for it earlier, the Old Timers Comic Book Show, which are doing horror, black and white. Next show for them is Guilty Pleasures. I'm not going to spoil it and tell you what's on there, but I tell you, there's some guilty people. Yes, Professor, I'm looking at you. Yes. And of course, if you like the Marvel stuff, it's No Price Podcast. And for DC, check out the Definitive Crusade. Phil, one more time, thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, anytime, dude, anytime. I have been your host, Johnny Machine Hughes, and as always, adios.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.shop, all about comic pop culture.